This is the Ronin Philosopher. I take a look at martial arts within the context of culture, pop culture, and fighting techniques as well. Today, I want to take a look at the effect of samurai culture in Western society and why we are so fascinated with them. One of my all-time favorite games is called Ghost of Tsushima. I'm very particular about which styles I choose to fight with and what games I choose to buy. It's a lot of money after all. And this game just blew me away with its combat style, its excellent storytelling, and how the game is just single-handedly the most gorgeous I've ever seen. With the atmosphere changing so much and being so rich that I easily find myself losing track of all time. That being said though, there were some criticisms that I came across before buying the game. One of the main ones was that people seem to think that it glamorizes samurai culture, as if the samurai were the knights of Asia or something along those lines. The game itself is set in the year 1274, around the time of the first Mongol invasion of Japan. As far as history goes, the game is dead on in the beginning, where the samurai lose badly to the Mongols. However, after that, there's a lot of historical license that takes place. The armor is somewhat off for the time period, and there was no active resistance on Tsushima Island during that time, unfortunately, because the Mongols more or less killed everybody. As the main protagonist of the game, your job is to set up a defense and a resistance against the Mongols and basically kick them off the island and free your people. So yeah, the game does kind of set up the samurai as these knights of Asia who are honor-bound by honor and hires ideals of sacrifice. But it's a Western ideal. And if you talk to anyone from Asia, Japan included, they're going to tell you that the Japanese samurai could be just as cold-blooded, murderous, and corrupt as any other warrior society throughout world history. So given this fact, it led me to wonder, how come we in America still look at Japanese samurai as these honorable warriors and through these rose-tinted glasses? So I'm going to jump back a little bit here. Bear with me, please. I think it starts in World War II, when America and Japan were fighting the war in the Pacific. Between 1941 and 1945, many people died, and many people died at the hands of Japanese soldiers, who were already infamous for their own brutality. Yet, as the war began to come to its conclusion, Japanese soldiers became more fanatical, doing infamous banzai charges and kamikaze attacks on American and Allied warships, killing hundreds of people. It was these suicidal acts that I think first introduced American society to the concept of Japanese culture and Japanese samurai in particular. People and soldiers who were so honor-bound to their homeland and to their emperor that they would rather die than surrender and seem to have no fear of death whatsoever. Now, enter post-World War II Japan, where the nation is rebuilding itself under American jurisdiction. In 1954, a movie came out that further popularized the image of the samurai, and that movie was called Seven Samurai. It was about a ragtag band of 7 samurai from various social classes who are hired to defend a village from bandits. Sometime after that, in 1972, a spaghetti western came out called Red Sun that paired together 2 cultural icons, the samurai from Japan and the cowboy from the American West. The one warrior with his katana blade and the other with his Colt 6-shooter. Slowly but surely, American culture began to realize that the samurai was Japan's most recognized global symbol. And it wasn't just American business that recognized this, but Japanese business as well. They exported the idea through movies, anime, and manga, and by the turn of the century, it had become just as commonplace in American culture as it was in Japan. All of this is rather interesting, considering that before 1853, the samurai were known for exactly the opposite of cultural integration. American culture continued to look up to samurai culture even into the 2000s, such as 2003 to The Last Samurai, promoting this image of honor-bound swordsmen. Even modern-day martial artists and soldiers would often reference them, but in kind of a backhanded way, usually when talking about real combat or real war, and how it was about victory and not about any idea of honor. However, what also began to happen was that people started to wise up and started to see that the samurai were just like the American cowboy or mafia, people who were just as nuanced and complicated rather than the simple black and white image that the movies and media made them out to be. Like I said before, the samurai could be just as corrupt and murderous as anybody else. They weren't angels. So in light of these facts, how come we are still so fascinated by them then? Personally, I believe that the reason for this is because it's an exotic culture. It's unfamiliar, and despite the stereotype of honor and such, the fact that there is some truth to those concepts of honor and their behavior about it lends samurai a certain past and grace than the American mindset about how we perceive them. Still, there have been attempts made to humanize the samurai rather than going by the glorified image that we're all familiar with. The aforementioned Ghost of Tsushima often goes into detail about how a lot of the people did not like the samurai because despite their ideals of honor, sacrifice, and defending their people, they also believed that all the people's resources had to go to their own war efforts, despite what it cost them personally. Also, there are subplots that involve corrupt samurai families taking out other samurai families who they considered rivals in order to make power plays. And moreover, there is this attitude among many of the samurai players that they take no guff from anybody. If you didn't show them the proper respect or obey them, it was your life. Seven Samurai 2 also shows windows into the samurai culture and that they're not as clean cut as they're made out to be as well. It turns out that the village that the samurai were hired to defend actually have been killing other samurai in order for their armor and to protect themselves. When the 6 of the 7 actually find out about this, they are considering abandoning them or just killing them. However, one of them, who we think is crazed, but actually comes from another village that was also ravaged by the samurai, defends the town. He says that it was because of the many wars that the samurai were fighting that villagers and many common people in Japan were driven to such treachery. That it was in fact the samurai themselves who created the situation where the people they defended could not be trusted in the first place. In reality, there are a lot of behaviors within samurai culture that we would find abhorrent and would never tolerate today. For example, it was allowed by law that a samurai could kill anyone who he felt had disrespected them. And even though he was held accountable by the local lord as to why he killed that person, it was still a scary thought that someone could just kill you if they thought that you looked at them the wrong way, even if you never meant it. Yet, we still give samurai culture a grace pass. This is largely because of that image of honor that I was talking about before. Many of us who live in the West are used to conditional loyalty. The idea that someone could look at you, swear loyalty, agree to a contract, or even love you, and then 5 minutes later betray you is somewhat commonplace. In contrast, the idea, even if it's a remote idea, that someone can look at you, swear loyalty to you, and then mean it and follow up on it is extremely appealing. Many of us would see this behavior as impractical, and by no means am I saying that samurai never lie, but at the same time, it still subconsciously appeals to some part of us that wants that acceptance and loyalty. It's these potential ideals that usually overshadow the facts and why we ignore them. Simple truths are easier to swallow than nuance and human complexity. All that being said though, the glamorization does go both ways. It is not a one-sided street by any means. Karaoke bars that sing American songs and Japanese media importing elements of American pop culture like hip-hop are just some examples that both sides tend to have a view of the grass is always greener on the other side. Now, of course, there can be problems with this, but there's also benefits, and in my opinion, more benefits. Take, for example, that before World War II, Japanese people were taught that they were the superior race, and that every other race, particularly other Asian races, were inferior to them. Anything that did happen to them, or if they got conquered, they deserved it. Yet today, Japan is considered one of the most pacifist countries in the world. People there don't want a war. they are benefiting too much from the peace that they have gained. And likewise, look at how Americans see Japanese. We were taught, just like they were, that we, or at least the white Americans, were superior to everyone else as well. Yet, these days, most Americans don't look at the Japanese as the bastards who bombed Pearl Harbor. At best, they view it as it was their ancestors who did it, not their modern equivalents. We indulge in what each other has to offer. Even with its problematic history, it was samurai culture and our obsession with it that was the gateway to exploring the more positive aspects about Japanese culture, and vice versa. And I think that is a fair exchange, like in the game Ghost of Tsushima.